The wacky world of medieval royalty. To all the secretly goofy medieval monarchs who, despite their crowns and scepters, probably tripped over their robes at least once, spilled wine on their velvet tunics during a state banquet, and secretly giggled at the absurdity of it all. This book is dedicated to the delightfully chaotic and surprisingly relatable lives of those who reigned supreme, yet somehow still managed to be hilariously human. May their accidental beard fires, ill-conceived fashion choices, and epic courtly blunders forever inspire us to laugh at the foibles of power and the enduring comedy of history. It's a testament to the fact that even kings and queens, burdened with the weighty affairs of state, were not immune to the occasional pratfall, the unexpected sneeze at an inopportune moment, or the sheer embarrassment of a rogue courtier's poorly timed joke. To the monarchs who perhaps wished for a slightly less cumbersome crown, slightly less formal attire, and a slightly less dramatic court, we salute you. Your reign, filled with both grandeur and glorious goofiness, makes for a tale worthy of hearty laughter and a raised tankard, or perhaps a delicately balanced goblet, lest it should meet a similarly unfortunate fate as those many a royal feast. For we too know that the path to history is often paved with well-meaning intentions, spectacular failures, and the kind of comedic timing only a truly unpredictable historical figure could pull off. So raise your imaginary tankard, or actual mug of something delightful, to the kings, queens, princes, and princesses whose lives, though undeniably significant, were also undeniably uproariously funny. And to those who might find themselves tripping over their own metaphorical robes in the pursuit of their own dreams, may your stumbles be less disastrous, your spills less messy, and your laughter far louder. Chapter 1. A Royal Feast, or Fiasco. The year is 1485. The air in the great hall of Grimshaw Castle hung thick with the aroma of roasted boar, spiced wine, and a distinct undercurrent of anxiety. King Theodore III, a man whose culinary adventures often outweighed his common sense, was about to unveil the piece de resistance of his lavish banquet, a swan, painstakingly roasted and adorned with a miniature edible castle made entirely of marzipan. The castle, it must be said, was a marvel of miniature architecture, a testament to the royal pastry chef's considerable, if slightly misplaced, talent. Theodore, however, was not known for his grace. His attire, a velvet doublet several sizes too small, straining at the seams over his considerable girth, did little to enhance his already precarious balance. His beard, a magnificent fiery red tangle that reached his ample chest, swayed precariously with each nervous shift of his weight. Queen Isolde, resplendent in a gown the color of a bruised plum, watched her husband with a mixture of apprehension and thinly veiled amusement. Her own headdress, a towering confection of feathers, pearls, and what appeared to be a small taxidermied squirrel, threatened to topple at any moment. The great hall buzzed with anticipation. Lords and ladies clad in silks and velvets so rich they practically hummed, whispered amongst themselves. Their attire, a dizzying array of colors and fabrics, was a testament to the era's flamboyant fashion sense. One particularly flamboyant lord sported a hat adorned with a stuffed peacock, while a lady nearby wore a gown so heavily embroidered it appeared to be moving under its own weight. Their conversations, a mixture of courtly gossip and hushed speculation about the swan, rippled through the hall like miniature waves. The tension reached a fever pitch as the royal pastry chef, a nervous young man named Barnaby, presented the swan on a silver platter. Barnaby, whose face was pale beneath his flour-dusted apron, bowed low before the king. His trembling hands barely managed to keep the platter steady as he presented the culinary masterpiece. Theodore, however, was not impressed by the artistry. His eyes were fixated on the marzipan castle. "Magnificent, Barnaby!" Theodore boomed, his voice echoing through the hall. He reached out a hand, his intention to admire the intricate details of the miniature stronghold. However, in his enthusiasm, he leaned too far, his beard brushing against the flickering candles arranged around the platter. A plume of flame erupted from his chin, igniting his magnificent beard in a spectacular burst of red fire. The hall erupted into chaos. Screams punctuated the sudden silence, followed by the sound of frantic activity. Barnaby dropped the platter, the swan and its marzipan castle crumbling in a messy heap onto the polished floor. Queen Isolde, her face a picture of horror turned amusement, attempted to extinguish the fire with a nearby goblet of spiced wine, resulting in a shower of burning wine and a surprisingly effective, if slightly soggy, extinguishing of the flames. Theodore, meanwhile, was reduced to a sputtering, flame-haired mess, frantically patting at his burning beard. The court physicians, already alerted by the initial shriek, rushed forward with buckets of water, adding to the general dampness and causing a near catastrophic collapse of the queen's impressive headdress. Feathers and pearls scattered like confetti, adding a layer of chaos to the already absurd scene. The initial panic subsided into a bewildered hush as everyone assessed the damage. The swan was ruined. The king was slightly singed. The queen was covered in water and detached feathers, and the floor was a sticky mess of marzipan and spilled wine. Yet, amidst the wreckage, a strange thing happened. Laughter, a ripple of amusement spread through the hall, morphing into a full-blown roar as the courtiers, freed from the rigid constraints of courtly decorum, began to openly chuckle at the spectacle. The incident, of course, did not end there. The subsequent investigation into the great banquet blunder, as it would come to be known, proved to be almost as entertaining as the blunder itself. Barnaby, exonerated of all blame, was hailed a hero for his remarkable, if slightly flammable, culinary creation. The king, sporting a rather pathetically singed beard, issued a royal decree mandating a complete review of royal banquet safety protocols. Queen Isolde, ever the pragmatist, ordered a complete restocking of her personal supply of headdresses, this time opting for a somewhat less ambitious style. The great banquet blunder became a legend, a testament to the unexpected absurdities that could, and often did, befall even the most powerful of medieval monarchs. It proved once and for all that even in the most formal of settings, a bit of chaos and a healthy dose of laughter could bring even the most rigid of courtly circles to their knees, or at least to their feet, clutching their sides in amusement. The story, passed down through generations, served as a delightful reminder that even in the midst of royal extravagance, the human element, with all its clumsiness, unexpected accidents, and inherent absurdity, would always prevail. The meticulous rules of medieval dining etiquette, with their intricate rituals and potentially explosive consequences, were thoroughly and hilariously undermined. The tale of the swan, the fire, and the crumbling marzipan castle became a symbol of the era, a grand, chaotic, utterly ridiculous celebration of the unexpected. And it certainly set the tone for the rest of King Theodore's reign, a reign filled with plenty more blunders that would make even the most stoic historian chuckle. The tales, in fact, are still being told to this day, proving that laughter, like a good roasted swan, truly is timeless. The only difference being, of course, that the swan should not be near any candles. The aftermath of the great banquet blunder left Grimshaw Castle smelling faintly of scorched boar and singed beard, but the lingering aroma of amusement proved far more potent. As the court slowly recovered, both physically and emotionally, from the fiery spectacle, attention shifted, as it inevitably would, to the next grand spectacle, the fashions. Queen Isolde, her spirits miraculously unbent despite the soggy remains of her elaborate headdress, took this opportunity to showcase her own brand of regal extravagance. Isolde's wardrobe was legendary, a testament to her unwavering dedication to sartorial splendor. Her gowns were not merely garments. They were walking works of art, painstakingly crafted from the finest silks and velvets, embroidered with threads of gold and silver that shimmered like captured starlight. One particularly memorable ensemble, rumored to have been inspired by a particularly vivid dream involving a flock of iridescent peacocks and a mountain of rubies, featured a skirt so heavy with jewels it required two sturdy footmen to help her navigate the castle corridors. The train alone could easily have furnished a small village with luxurious upholstery. Her headdresses were equally magnificent, though perhaps slightly less fire-resistant. One involved a towering structure of pheasant feathers, interspersed with pearls and meticulously crafted miniature silver birds. Another, a personal favorite, featured a miniature replica of Grimshaw Castle itself, painstakingly crafted from precious stones and topped with a tiny, spinning weather vane. Naturally, this headdress was not without its practical drawbacks. It proved rather cumbersome to wear while dining, a fact that Isolde repeatedly ignored, and on one infamous occasion, it caused a near-fatal collision with a low-hanging chandelier. The resulting shower of crystals and feathers was only slightly less impressive than the original headdress itself. The queen's obsession with fashion extended beyond her own attire. She possessed an almost tyrannical eye for detail, holding her seamstresses to impossibly high standards. Master Elias, the royal tailor, a man whose perpetually strained expression and perpetually gray hair spoke volumes about the queen's exacting demands, was known to spend sleepless nights battling deadlines and temper tantrums. The queen's latest whim, a gown incorporating interwoven strands of real hair from a rare breed of albino llama, obtained at considerable expense from a remote Himalayan monastery, presented Elias with a particularly formidable challenge. "The llama hair must be perfectly aligned, Elias," Isolde had insisted, her voice sharp as a diamond. "Each strand must reflect the light in the precise manner befitting a queen. I expect it to shimmer, Elias, not merely glitter, and absolutely no stray hairs." Elias, who had already sacrificed several years of his life to the queen's sartorial demands, could only nod weakly, the weight of the albino llama's legacy pressing heavily upon his shoulders. He envisioned a future where he'd be buried under a mountain of discarded silk scraps and unstitched llama hair, a silent testament to his unwavering service to the queen. The extravagance of royal fashion wasn't limited to the queen. The court was a dazzling display of silks, velvets, and brocades, a riot of color and texture. Lords flaunted their wealth with intricately embroidered doublets and flamboyant hats adorned with feathers, jewels, and occasionally rather alarming taxidermied animals. One particularly adventurous lord sported a hat featuring a perfectly preserved badger, its tiny glass eyes staring intensely at anyone who dared to meet his gaze. The ladies, of course, were no less flamboyant. Their gowns, often so heavy with embroidery that they restricted their movement, were a showcase of wealth, status, and sheer audacity. The fabrics themselves held a significance that extended beyond mere aesthetics. Ermine, a symbol of royal power, adorned the sleeves and collars of the most privileged courtiers. Silk, imported from distant lands, was a luxury reserved for the elite. The sheer cost of these materials often outweighed the cost of a modest village, reflecting the extreme disparity of wealth during the time. The colors, too, held symbolic meaning, with each hue representing a particular virtue, quality, or aspiration, a complex code understood only by the court's most seasoned social climbers. A deep crimson might symbolize bravery, a sky blue might signify faithfulness, and an unfortunate shade of puce, well, that often symbolized something a bit more unfortunate. But the pursuit of fashion perfection came at a price. The gowns were often so cumbersome that they hindered even the simplest of movements. Courtiers, accustomed to their lavish attire, learned to maneuver through courtly life with a remarkable combination of grace and awkwardness. Dining, for example, became a particularly hazardous undertaking, as long trains became entangled in the legs of the unwary, causing both tripping hazards and social mortifications. The headdresses, magnificent as they were, proved equally problematic. Many a noble head collided with chandeliers, doorways, and even fellow courtiers, leading to a series of minor injuries and considerable social embarrassment. One memorable incident involved Lord Harrington, a particularly pompous nobleman known for his ostentatious hat, adorned ironically with a miniature replica of a rather clumsy-looking stork. While attempting a particularly elaborate bow before the queen, his hat became entangled in his own elaborate ruff, causing him to topple dramatically onto a platter of freshly baked tarts. The subsequent scattering of pastry and feathers proved a fitting climax to a day that had already been punctuated by several near-catastrophic fashion mishaps. The incident, however, merely underscored the inherent absurdity of extreme fashion, even in a court where absurdity was generally the norm. The royal tailor, Master Elias emerged from all this as a sort of reluctant hero. His skill and patience were almost legendary, almost mythical in scope considering the demands made upon him. He was not merely a tailor, he was a magician, weaving together silks, velvets, and occasional llama hair into fantastical garments that were as much a part of the court's history as any royal decree or political maneuver. And one suspects that he likely secretly relished the chaos, finding a strange, perverse amusement in the ongoing battles between sartorial splendor and the inevitable laws of gravity. After all, even the most rigid courtly etiquette couldn't quite withstand the allure of a well-placed tumble, a strategically scattered jewel, or a perfectly timed entanglement. In the world of medieval royal fashion, even a minor disaster could become a source of endless amusement. The clothes, after all, might tell a story, but the wearers often provided the most entertaining narrative. The sun, a grudging participant in the royal timetable, finally peeked over the horizon, casting a weak, pale light into King Theodore's bedchamber. Theodore, however, remained stubbornly shrouded in darkness, his slumber punctuated by the low rumble of digestive distress. The previous night's feast, a culinary adventure that had involved a rather unfortunate incident with a pheasant pie and a particularly strong vintage of mead, had left its mark. The king stirred, groaning softly. His royal chamberlains, ever vigilant, were already on their feet, a silent, efficient team preparing for the day's rigmarole. His first order of business? A highly specialized concoction, a brew of ginger, chamomile, and a dash of something mysteriously labeled King's Secret Stomach Soother, designed to quell the royal rebellion in his gut. This was followed by a meticulously prepared breakfast, a far cry from the excesses of the previous evening. Forget the roasted boar and spiced goose. Today's meal consisted of bland porridge, a single slice of toast, and a suspiciously watery fruit compote. Even royalty, it seemed, had to pay the piper, or in this case the royal physician, for their culinary indulgences, while Theodore attended to his less than regal morning business. Sir Reginald, his chief advisor, wrestled with a mountain of paperwork that threatened to engulf him entirely. He was a man accustomed to the pressures of court life, a seasoned veteran in the relentless battle against royal decrees, political intrigue, and the ever-present threat of stray ink stains ruining his impeccable doublet. Yet, even Sir Reginald found himself occasionally overwhelmed by the sheer volume of documents that crossed his desk. Tax reports from disgruntled barons, petitions from ambitious knights, pleas from starving villagers. It was a never-ending deluge of human wants and needs, all demanding immediate attention. The king, emerging from his private chambers looking slightly less like a man wrestling with a dragon, and slightly more like a man wrestling with indigestion, found Sir Reginald buried under an avalanche of parchment. "Reginald," he mumbled, clutching his stomach. "Have you discovered a new continent hidden beneath that pile of paperwork?" Sir Reginald, without looking up, merely sighed. "Your Majesty, if I were to discover a new continent, it would likely be composed entirely of unanswered pleas for royal patronage." He picked up a particularly hefty document, its seal cracked and its edges frayed. "This one concerns a dispute between two farmers over a single goose." "A goose, Your Majesty?" The goose has become the centerpiece of a political debate of epic proportions. The king, though still grappling with his own internal battles, managed a weak smile. Ah, the enduring power of the goose. One must never underestimate its strategic importance. Their morning routine continued, a dance between royal decrees and administrative headaches. Theodore, ever the pragmatist, attempted to address the more pressing matters of state, reviewing reports, approving or rejecting petitions, and engaging in the delicate art of appeasing disgruntled nobles without emptying the royal treasury. Meanwhile, Sir Reginald managed to keep the court from descending into chaos, a feat more challenging than it might seem. The throne room itself was a spectacle of controlled chaos. Courtiers jostled for position, eager to catch the king's eye, whisper a word in his ear, or simply bask in the reflected glory of their ruler. The air buzzed with a mixture of whispered conspiracies, sycophantic praise, and the constant rustling of fine silks and velvets. Each person had a particular routine, an intricate ballet of bows, curtsies, and strategically placed smiles designed to secure favor or avoid the king's displeasure. The petitions they presented were equally varied. One nobleman sought permission to build a new hunting lodge, conveniently located near a particularly profitable gold mine. Another desperately pleaded for a royal pardon after engaging in a rather public and scandalous brawl in a local tavern. The king, attempting to maintain a semblance of regal composure, listened with patient, if slightly pained, attention. His decisions held the potential to shape the lives of countless individuals, but the day itself seemed to consist of a never-ending string of insignificant grievances, each demanding a fraction of his already overtaxed attention. The midday meal, a far cry from the previous night's catastrophe, was a more subdued affair. A simple yet surprisingly tasty stew of vegetables and mutton was the highlight. It lacked the flamboyance of the great banquet blunder, yet the king found himself appreciating its uncomplicated charm. Even royalty, it seemed, appreciated a break from culinary excess. The afternoon hours brought a new set of challenges. A delegation of ambassadors from a neighboring kingdom arrived, their demands as convoluted and baffling as the elaborate patterns woven into their robes. Negotiations began, a delicate dance of diplomacy and subtle threats. King Theodore, despite his morning digestive issues, proved a shrewd negotiator, expertly navigating the treacherous waters of international relations. Sir Reginald, of course, was ever vigilant, whispering advice and preparing counter-arguments. As evening approached, a sense of fatigue settled over the court. Even the most flamboyant courtiers began to display signs of weariness. The energy of the morning, a frenetic mix of ambition and anticipation, had waned, replaced by a subdued sense of exhaustion. The day's events, while not quite as exciting as a royal banquet gone wrong, had presented a multitude of challenges. From managing the demands of a rebellious stomach to navigating the complexities of courtly life, the reality of being a king was far less glamorous than the legends suggested. As the final rays of the setting sun illuminated the castle, King Theodore found himself reflecting on the day's events. It was not the stuff of epic poems, but it was the stuff of life, and he had, against all odds, managed to avoid another culinary catastrophe. Perhaps, he mused, a life of slightly bland porridge and administrative headaches was preferable to a life of fire-related disasters and indigestion. The great banquet blunder, it seemed, had taught him a valuable lesson. The greatest challenge was not conquering dragons, but mastering the art of ruling a kingdom with minimal intestinal distress. And Sir Reginald? He was already beginning to sort through the next day's paperwork, his face a mask of weary resignation, yet one might argue a look of quiet satisfaction. He was, after all, the silent guardian, the watchful protector, the man who kept the kingdom from collapsing under its own weight. And occasionally, amidst the seemingly endless stream of petitions and royal decrees, he'd find himself indulging in a quiet amusement. A life spent managing the daily chaos of a royal court was perhaps not as glamorous as the tales suggested, but certainly far more interesting than anything he could have dreamed of. The royal routine was, in a word, utterly bonkers, but perhaps this is what made it so uniquely and wonderfully chaotic. The evening's festivities, thankfully devoid of spontaneously combusting poultry, concluded with a surprisingly harmonious rendition of a rather off-key ballad about a particularly brave and possibly slightly delusional knight who single-handedly defeated a dragon using a rusty spoon. Even the king, still nursing a lingering twinge of indigestion, found himself chuckling at the blatant absurdity of the lyrics. But as the last notes faded and the courtiers began their slow, orchestrated dispersal, the true comedic chaos of the royal court began to unfold. Lord Barlow, a man whose ambition far outweighed his intellect, decided this was the opportune moment to further his standing with the king. He'd hatched a plan, a masterstroke of political maneuvering, at least in his own estimation, involving a rather valuable, albeit slightly chipped, porcelain swan. This swan, a gift from a far-off, exotic land, was rumored to possess mystical properties, though these properties remained largely undefined, even to Lord Barlow himself. His plan was simple. present the swan to the king, securing his favor and perhaps a promotion to a position of slightly more responsibility than royal feather duster. His execution, however, lacked the finesse of his ambition. In his eagerness to outshine his rivals, Lord Barlow tripped over a rather unfortunate stray rug, sending the porcelain swan tumbling through the air in a graceful, though unintentional arc. It landed with a rather sickening crack at the feet of Lady Beatrice, notorious for her sharp tongue and even sharper elbows. Lady Beatrice, never one to miss an opportunity for a well-placed insult, surveyed the shattered remains of the swan with a chilling smirk. "Oh dear," she cooed, her voice dripping with sarcasm. "It appears Lord Barlow's ambitions have met a rather abrupt end. Perhaps he should stick to feather dusting." This seemingly minor incident escalated into a full-blown royal squabble, with accusations flying faster than the porcelain shards. Lord Barlow naturally blamed Lady Beatrice for causing the swan's demise, claiming she'd intentionally tripped him. Lady Beatrice countered by suggesting Lord Barlow's clumsiness was a result of excessive mead consumption, a claim not entirely unfounded, given the previous evening's events. The resulting exchange of insults became a masterclass in medieval verbal sparring, with each courtier adding their own colorful contributions, often referencing family histories and long-forgotten slights. Meanwhile, Sir Reginald, ever the peacemaker, or at least the man who desperately tried to avoid escalating matters into full-blown courtly warfare, attempted to mediate the dispute. His efforts, however, were met with minimal success. The argument escalated into a debate over the swan's supposed mystical powers, then veered off into a lengthy discussion about the proper etiquette for handling porcelain waterfowl, finally culminating in a rather heated argument about the merits of various rug designs. The king, initially amused by the spectacle, eventually found himself forced to intervene. His decree, the entire matter was to be settled by a game of chess. The loser would be required to clean the royal stables for a week. The logic behind this decision remained a mystery, even to the king himself. However, given the generally chaotic nature of royal court decisions, this particular absurdity seemed perfectly in line with the prevailing norms. The chess match, a display of strategic brilliance, or lack thereof, became another hilarious chapter in this ongoing saga. Lord Barlow, it turned out, possessed the strategic skills of a particularly inept badger, consistently blundering his pieces and muttering incomprehensible threats in a surprisingly high-pitched voice. Lady Beatrice, however, while fiercely competitive, exhibited a penchant for theatrics that frequently distracted her from the actual game. She'd dramatically gasp whenever a piece was captured, then spend an excessive amount of time adjusting her headdress before making her next move. The game concluded not with a decisive victory, but with a double forfeit. Both contenders, in a remarkable display of simultaneous distraction, knocked over the chessboard in a flurry of frustrated flailing. This led to a new decree. Both Lord Barlow and Lady Beatrice were to clean the royal stables for a week, each assigned to a separate stall. The fallout from this porcelain swan debacle resonated through the court for weeks. The incident became the subject of countless whispered conversations, elaborate rumors, and a series of satirical ballads composed by the court musicians. The incident served as a constant reminder that even in a world of political intrigue and high-stakes power plays, the simplest of mishaps could transform into a full-blown comedic disaster. The next few days were marked by a flurry of equally absurd events. A debate on the proper color of royal socks devolved into a shouting match that involved the throwing of various footwear. An argument over the correct way to arrange flowers in the royal gardens resulted in a rather impressive floral-based brawl. Even the royal cook, renowned for his culinary creativity, managed to accidentally set the kitchen ablaze while attempting to create a new dish he dubbed Flaming Pheasant Surprise. The king, having learned his lesson from the previous night's banquet, merely sighed and ordered more bland porridge. Meanwhile, Sir Reginald, armed with an endless supply of paperwork and a remarkable capacity for patience, continued his valiant fight against the daily chaos of courtly life. The court, it seemed, thrived on the absurd, and even the most minor incident could transform into a grand, comedic spectacle that would be recounted for years to come, embellishing each retelling with further ridiculous details and fanciful exaggerations. The tale of the porcelain swan, for instance, would later be transformed into a dramatic legend about a magically cursed artifact, though the actual story involved little more than a slightly clumsy courtier and a temperamental lady-in-waiting. The reality, however, was far funnier than any fictionalized legend could ever hope to be. The royal court, in its chaotic glory, continued its peculiar dance of power struggles, silly squabbles, and unexpected resolutions. Each day brought a new wave of ridiculous events, further solidifying the reputation of the court as a place where the absurd was not only tolerated but actively embraced. The stories of their antics, passed down through generations, would serve as a humorous reminder that even in the most prestigious of settings, human folly prevails, creating a rich tapestry of comedic moments in the history of medieval royalty. And somewhere in the annals of royal history, the tale of the porcelain swan would forever remain a testament to the surprising silliness of courtly life. The true history of medieval courts, after all, wasn't just about grand battles and epic conquests, but about the quieter, often funnier moments of everyday life, lived amidst the backdrop of lavish feasts, extravagant costumes, and the constant, never-ending, wonderfully ridiculous shenanigans of its inhabitants. The king's fondness for miniature piglets, a herd of which freely roamed the royal gardens, was, to put it mildly, unconventional. These weren't ordinary piglets. Oh no, these were pampered porkers, each sporting a tiny, hand-stitched velvet coat and a jeweled collar. They had their own dedicated staff, responsible for their grooming, feeding, a diet consisting primarily of imported figs and honey, and ensuring their tiny snorts remained uninterrupted. Courtly gossip frequently centered around the piglet's latest escapades, including an infamous incident involving a stolen royal napkin, which, it was later discovered, was used as a rather luxurious bed for one particularly pampered piglet named Bartholomew. The royal obsession with exotic pets extended beyond the piglets. King Theodore, a man of notoriously peculiar tastes, once owned a collection of trained badgers, which he used as living chess pieces. The badgers, bless their furry hearts, were notoriously unreliable players, often more interested in sniffing the chessboard than capturing their opponent's pieces. A royal game of badger chess was said to be an experience of unparalleled chaos, with pieces being flung across the floor, strategic plans being thwarted by unexpected badger naps, and an unsettling amount of pungent badger musk permeating the air. Hygiene practices in the royal court were, let's just say, creatively interpreted. Bathing, for example, was viewed as an optional activity, with some courtiers going months without a proper wash. Perfume, however, was used liberally, attempting to mask the less than pleasant aromas that often clung to the royal entourage. The preferred perfume, a concoction of myrrh, rose petals, and a rather alarming amount of civet, was said to be able to knock a small falcon off its perch. One particularly memorable event involved a royal ball where the collective scent of unwashed courtiers and overpowering perfume resulted in a mass fainting episode, proving that even in the Middle Ages, too much of a good thing could be quite overwhelming. Royal entertainment was equally peculiar. Jousting tournaments, while still popular, frequently involved a surprising array of improvised weapons. One particularly memorable tournament saw knights battling it out using oversized sausages instead of lances, resulting in a rather sticky and somewhat hilarious mess. Other forms of entertainment included elaborate bird-calling contests, judged by the king himself, whose avian expertise was questionable at best, and competitive snail racing. The speed of the snails, predictably, was glacial, but the level of courtly intrigue surrounding their progress was anything but. Bets were placed, alliances were formed, and accusations of foul play flew as swiftly as, or perhaps more accurately, as slowly as, the snails themselves. The royal kitchens were a scene of constant controlled chaos. The royal chef, a man who treated cooking as a form of performance art, delighted in creating extravagant dishes, many of which were more visually impressive than palatable. The infamous towering turkey tart, a culinary monstrosity 10 feet high, remains a legend in the court, remembered not for its taste, but for the structural collapse that resulted in a culinary avalanche burying several unsuspecting courtiers beneath a mountain of pastry and poultry. Tales still abound of dishes that, while undoubtedly impressive, possessed a decidedly questionable aroma and an even more questionable taste. The king's palate, it seemed, was as robust and unpredictable as his choice of pets. Beyond the immediate royal court, life amongst the common folk was also a source of endless amusement. Village festivals, often characterized by a remarkable amount of drunken revelry, were occasions of uninhibited fun and merriment. Competitions ranged from cheese rolling, which often ended with a chaotic stampede of participants down a grassy hill, to competitive mud wrestling, a surprisingly popular event, particularly among the younger generation. The commoners, it turned out, had a distinct flair for uninhibited fun, often leading to situations more farcical than any royal courtly intrigue. The royal hunting parties were, in a word, wild. These weren't merely hunting expeditions. They were elaborate, often absurd theatrical productions. The hunting grounds transformed into a stage for a series of increasingly ridiculous events, from costume contests amongst the hunters, featuring everything from giant rabbit outfits to elaborate deer disguises, to spontaneous musical performances featuring the hunting horns and other assorted instruments found at random in the forests. The hunts themselves often took a back seat to the theatrics, with the primary objective appearing to be not capturing prey, but rather creating an unforgettable and frequently hilarious display of royal exuberance. Even the seemingly mundane aspects of royal life were tinged with the absurd. Royal decrees were often written in excessively flowery language, resulting in proclamations that were both confusing and strangely poetic. Courtly correspondence took on a uniquely absurd tone, with letters often containing riddles, cryptic messages, and elaborate insults disguised as compliments. The very fabric of daily life, it seemed, was woven from a bizarre combination of formality and utter silliness. The accounts of these events, passed down through generations, are far from mere historical records. They are hilarious snapshots of human folly, evidence that even in the midst of power and prestige, the absurdity of everyday life prevails. The royal court, it appears, wasn't just a center of power and influence, but also a stage for a continuous, utterly enchanting, and unbelievably funny comedy show. These weren't simply kings and queens. They were a cast of hilariously flawed characters participating in a historical farce of epic proportions. And their legacy, far from being one of stern majesty, is one that invites us to laugh along with their foibles and to appreciate the wonderfully unexpected side of medieval royalty. The sheer scale of their eccentricities, their surprisingly relatable struggles with personal hygiene and questionable culinary choices, and the sheer absurdity of their daily routines paints a picture of a time and a people far more colorful and humorous than the history books often portray. The echoes of their laughter, even across the centuries, prove that even kings and queens can't help but be absurd at times. Chapter 2: Royal Weddings and Other Catastrophes. The wedding of Princess Aurelia, the king's youngest daughter, promised to be the social event of the century, or at least the century so far. Preparations had begun months in advance, a whirlwind of activity that transformed the usually sedate royal court into a hive of frantic energy. The cathedral, already a magnificent structure, was decked out in an excess of finery. Tapestries depicting scenes of mythical creatures battling oversized vegetables, a peculiar royal artistic preference, adorned the walls, and mountains of flowers, imported from far-flung lands at exorbitant cost, filled every available space. The air hung heavy with the scent of lilies, expensive perfume, and a faint, unsettling whiff of something vaguely resembling burnt sugar, a lingering reminder of a disastrous attempt to create a wedding cake the size of a small pony. The groom, Prince Percival of neighboring barony, was a nervous wreck. He was a man of quiet demeanor, more accustomed to scholarly pursuits than the boisterous demands of royal court life. The thought of marrying into such a famously eccentric family filled him with a mixture of dread and fascinated horror. He'd spent the weeks leading up to the wedding practicing his vows, tripping over his words and frequently forgetting his own name. His attempts at small talk with the princess's siblings had been met with a series of increasingly bizarre anecdotes about their pet badgers and the king's latest obsession with competitive snail racing. The princess, meanwhile, was a picture of serene composure, although behind her placid exterior simmered a cauldron of barely suppressed anxiety. Aurelia, unlike her boisterous siblings, possessed a quiet strength, but even she was starting to doubt the wisdom of marrying into a family whose most prized possession seemed to be a herd of miniature pigs dressed in velvet. Her wedding gown, a masterpiece of silk and gold embroidery, was so heavy she could barely move in it. She considered more than once simply running away and joining a convent. The day of the wedding dawned bright and sunny, a stark contrast to the brewing storm of anxieties within the cathedral. Guests began to arrive, a dazzling array of royalty, nobility, and assorted eccentrics, all vying for the best view of the proceedings. The seating arrangements were a source of constant contention, with whispered arguments erupting across the cathedral aisle like miniature volcanoes. One particularly memorable dispute involved the Duchess of Plumtree and the Earl of Turnip, both of whom insisted on the same seat, leading to a standoff that involved threats, tears, and the accidental deployment of a rogue firework, a common occurrence in these high-strung events. The ceremony itself was, predictably, anything but smooth. The Archbishop, usually known for his calm demeanor, suffered a sudden and inexplicable bout of the hiccups during his opening remarks. His attempts to control his involuntary spasms only served to amplify the problem, resulting in a series of hiccup-laced pronouncements that left the audience alternately amused and horrified. The wedding vows, already a source of stress for Prince Percival, were further complicated when a flock of escaped pigeons, apparently drawn by the abundance of tasty crumbs scattered about the cathedral, descended upon the proceedings, creating a cloud of feathers and causing a general flurry of pandemonium. Amidst the fluttering pigeons and the Archbishop's hiccups, the princess's beloved pet falcon decided the moment was ripe for a dramatic entrance. The magnificent bird, perched on the princess's glove, took flight and proceeded to circle the cathedral, causing several ladies-in-waiting to scream and faint. The falcon's aerial display was somewhat disrupted when it collided with a chandelier, resulting in a cascade of sparkling crystals and an unfortunate shower of floral arrangements upon the assembled guests. Then, the unexpected happened. The arrival of a rather substantial and exceedingly disgruntled badger. It appeared seemingly from nowhere, strutting confidently down the aisle. It was later revealed that the badger was Bartholomew, the most mischievous member of King Theodore's badger chess team. Bartholomew had evidently taken a wrong turn whilst escaping his designated enclosure. His presence caused a brief, yet highly entertaining moment of chaos as the wedding party attempted to tactfully remove him from the scene without causing further incident. However, just as the Archbishop attempted to regain control of the proceedings and his hiccups, a rogue sausage, apparently flung from the royal kitchens during a celebratory feast, or possibly as a deliberate act of culinary sabotage, sailed through the air, narrowly missing the princess's head and landing with a soft thud at the feet of the groom. This unexpected projectile sparked another wave of merriment that threatened to completely derail the entire ceremony. And then the crowning glory of the wedding debacle, the collapse of the aforementioned enormous wedding cake. The entire structure gave way, unleashing a torrent of sugary chaos onto the assembled guests. Mountains of frosting, fruit, and pastry rained down on the royal family, coating them in a thick layer of sweet, sticky goo. The king, ever the optimist, declared it the most memorable wedding cake in history. Despite the chaos, and perhaps because of it, the wedding was a resounding success, if one could define success in terms of levels of unpredictable chaos and sheer, unadulterated amusement. The union of Princess Aurelia and Prince Percival, forged amidst a storm of pigeons, hiccups, a rogue badger, and a collapsing wedding cake was a true testament to the enduring power of love and the surprising resilience of the human spirit in the face of utter absurdity. The story of the royal wedding debacle became a legendary tale, told and retold across the land, a humorous testament to the wonderfully unpredictable nature of medieval royal life. The memories of the event, recounted with laughter decades later, became another in the annals of the court's uniquely hilarious history, a reminder that even amidst the pomp and circumstance, the true heart of the matter could be found in the joyful embrace of the absurd. The sheer volume of anecdotes surrounding the event, the runaway pigeons, the hiccuping archbishop, the disgruntled badger, the flying sausage, cemented its place in the court's legendary collection of wedding woes. And for decades to come, the image of the royal family, coated in sticky wedding cake frosting, would serve as a cherished reminder of the time when even royalty couldn't escape the unpredictable whimsy of life itself. The tapestry depicting a knight valiantly battling a giant turnip, a testament to the king's peculiar artistic sensibilities, hung heavy above the royal bedchamber. King Theodore, a man whose love for competitive snail racing was only surpassed by his penchant for elaborate headwear, paced restlessly. Queen Isolde, a woman whose elegance belied a sharp political mind, sat by the window, her gaze fixed on the courtyard below. Their marriage, a union forged not in passionate love but in shrewd political calculation, was as fragile as a newly baked gingerbread man. Their union had secured a crucial alliance, a fact Theodore never tired of reminding Isolde. He would often bellow across the vast expanse of their bedchamber, a space more akin to a small throne room than a place for intimacy. "Remember, Isolde, this marriage solidified our position. Our prosperity rests on this union." Isolde, in turn, would offer a tight-lipped smile, her eyes betraying nothing of the simmering resentment she held for a husband whose affections were as fleeting as a summer fly. Their disagreements extended beyond matters of state. Theodore, a man of simple pleasures and an even simpler palate, preferred hearty stews and boisterous laughter to Isolde's refined tastes and quiet contemplation. He'd loudly declare his love for boiled cabbage whilst Isolde would sigh, secretly wishing for a light and delicate dish fit for a queen, not a peasant's feast. This clash of culinary styles was a microcosm of their fundamental incompatibility. The king's obsession with his collection of miniature pigs, dressed in increasingly elaborate costumes, further strained their already delicate relationship. The pigs, each named after a vanquished foe, or in a few cases a particularly stubborn vegetable, occupied a significant portion of the royal palace. Their grunting and snorting often disrupted the queen's attempts at quiet meditation, a ritual she found essential to maintaining her sanity amidst the chaotic court life. One particularly tense evening, Theodore, clad in a crown fashioned entirely from cheese, a testament to his eccentric culinary obsessions, announced his intention to enter the miniature pig beauty contest. The contest, a bizarre affair involving meticulously groomed pigs and a panel of judges known for their notoriously questionable judgment, was a highlight of the annual village fair. Isolde, already weary from a day of negotiating with foreign dignitaries and dealing with the never-ending complaints of her ladies-in-waiting, could only manage a weary sigh. "Theodore," she said, her voice tight with barely suppressed frustration, "must you involve our royal dignity in this pig-based frivolity?" Theodore naturally saw no problem. "My dearest Isolde, you misunderstand. This is not merely a contest, it's a matter of national pride. The honor of our kingdom rests upon the lustrous curls of Bartholomew III. Bartholomew III, a particularly plump and spoiled pig, was Theodore's personal favorite and the potential winner of the crown, a golden crown, of course." Their disagreements often extended into the night, their whispered arguments echoing through the vast emptiness of the royal bedchamber. The silence between their volleys of words was heavier than the elaborate velvet curtains that adorned the windows. The tension in their marriage wasn't just a matter of personality clashes. It was a battle of wills, a contest of dominance played out between the confines of their regal chambers. The political alliance that had brought them together was increasingly overshadowed by the personal struggles of two individuals ill-suited to share the same royal bedchamber. This uneasy truce, however, was often punctuated by moments of strange intimacy. Their shared experiences, the weight of ruling a kingdom amidst the constant threat of invasion, war, and the occasional rogue badger in the royal kitchen, created a strange bond between them. It wasn't necessarily love, but a begrudging respect for each other's resilience. One stormy night, after an especially tumultuous day that involved a disastrous attempt to train the royal falcon to retrieve lost court documents, Theodore, unusually subdued, sat by Isolde's side. The flickering candlelight illuminated the lines etched on their faces, years of stress and political maneuvering etched onto their features. He reached out, his hand covering hers. The touch, unexpected and gentle, was surprisingly comforting. He didn't speak of politics or war, nor of Bartholomew III's winning chances. He spoke instead of the simple things: the night sky, the relentless howling of the wind, and the unusual number of frogs currently residing in the royal moat. Isolde listened, her anger momentarily forgotten, replaced by a quiet appreciation for the unexpected vulnerability in her formidable husband. Their marriage was a tapestry woven with threads of political expediency, personal frustration, and occasional moments of surprising tenderness. It was a marriage far from the idealized romantic notions of fairy tales, yet it held within it a strange, undeniable resilience, a stubborn refusal to collapse under the weight of its contradictions. It was a marriage as chaotic and unpredictable as the medieval court itself, full of unexpected twists and turns, as unlikely as a well-trained falcon fetching a royal decree, as hilarious as a king wearing a cheese crown, and as enduring as the legend of the battling knight and the giant turnip. The tapestry of their relationship, like the kingdom they ruled, was a testament to the unexpected complexities of life, love, and the occasional, well-placed rogue badger. The clatter of pewter tankards and the boisterous laughter of the royal retainers faded as we moved from the king's and queen's chambers to a quieter corner of the palace. This was the domain of the royal children, a space where the weighty affairs of state were momentarily forgotten in favor of spilled milk, squabbles over toys, and the surprisingly sophisticated political maneuvering of children vying for the attention of their royal tutors. Princess Aurelia, all of 7 years old, was a whirlwind of silken skirts and rebellious spirit. Her younger brother, Prince Edgar, trailed behind her, a mop of unruly blonde hair bouncing with every hop and skip. Aurelia, with the imperious air of a queen in training, was currently engaged in a fierce negotiation with Thomas, the royal gardener's son, over the possession of a particularly plump earthworm. Thomas, a boy of similar age but possessing a calmer demeanor, was using a surprisingly persuasive argument about the worm's inherent value as bait for fish. Their argument was punctuated with shrieks of laughter and threats of royal displeasure, a miniature reflection of the political debates that raged in the adult world. Their governess, Mistress Eleanor, a woman whose patience had been tested to the breaking point by years of royal tantrums, sighed dramatically. She was a formidable woman, her stern demeanor tempered only by a secret fondness for baking gingerbread men, a skill she often used to bribe the royal children into moments of quiet obedience. "Princess Aurelia," she began, her voice laced with a weariness that spoke volumes about her long career, "I implore you to put down that earthworm. Its destiny lies not in your royal grasp, but in the belly of a rather large trout, according to young Master Thomas. Besides, you have your Latin lesson to attend to." Latin was, to Aurelia and Edgar, the bane of their existence. Master Bartholomew, their tutor, a man whose knowledge of ancient languages far surpassed his ability to control a classroom full of royal children, was currently attempting to instill the basic principles of declensions and conjugations. His efforts, however, were constantly interrupted by the children's attempts at creative interpretations of the assigned texts. Edgar, for instance, was convinced that the Roman Emperor Augustus was a particularly skilled juggler, based on his own misinterpretations of a rather complex historical passage. Aurelia, meanwhile, was engrossed in a detailed drawing of a dragon in her Latin textbook, adding vibrant rainbow scales to the ancient Roman text with unbridled enthusiasm. Their lessons were far from solemn affairs. One could regularly find quill pens flung across the room during heated arguments over the proper translation of a particularly obscure phrase, or a frantic scramble for a lost toy soldier amid piles of parchment and maps. Their laughter echoed through the castle halls, a discordant counterpoint to the formal discussions held in the adult chambers. The royal nursery and the schoolroom were a microcosm of the kingdom itself, a battleground of wills, a symphony of chaos, and a surprisingly effective training ground for future rulers. The curriculum wasn't limited to the dry monotony of Latin grammar. Royal children received training in falconry, archery, dancing, a rather necessary skill for courtly life, and a surprisingly extensive course in medieval etiquette. This last subject proved to be particularly challenging. Master Perkins, the etiquette instructor, was a nervous wreck. He spent hours explaining the proper way to bow, curtsy, and address nobles of varying rank. His lessons were a hilarious spectacle of mishaps, a cascade of bumped heads, tripped feet, and accidental elbow jabs, all performed with impeccable sincerity and a dash of royal clumsiness. Royal children's playtime was a different kind of education altogether. Their games often mimicked the adult world, with battles fought using toy swords and alliances forged over the possession of the latest miniature castle. Intrigue and betrayal were as commonplace in the royal nursery as in the court itself. These were skills honed not in classrooms, but in the rough and tumble world of royal childhood, where the stakes might be a treasured toy horse or the privilege of eating dessert first. One particularly memorable afternoon saw Aurelia and Edgar engaged in a mock siege of the royal kitchen. Their army consisted of a ragtag collection of toy soldiers, stuffed animals, and an unfortunate gingerbread man that bore the brunt of Aurelia's tactical genius. Their objective? To secure a stash of stolen honey cakes hidden by the royal chef. The siege resulted in a chaotic scene involving flour bombs, flying spoonfuls of jam, and a rather distraught royal chef covered in whipped cream. Such events weren't entirely unwelcome by the adults. The royal court often needed a bit of levity, and the antics of the young royals frequently provided a much-needed respite from political machinations. The sounds of their laughter often drifted into the council chambers, a gentle reminder of the lighter side of life amidst serious negotiations and high-stakes decisions. Beyond the fun and games, however, there was a constant undercurrent of pressure. These children were not simply pampered offspring. They were future monarchs, destined to rule a kingdom, make difficult decisions, and potentially face wars and rebellions. They were taught history not only to understand the past, but to learn from the mistakes of their predecessors. Their lessons extended beyond books, teaching them to assess people, manage conflicts, and use diplomacy and cunning, traits essential for a successful reign. Even play was a form of education. Strategy games taught them to plan ahead, think several steps beyond an immediate threat, and anticipate the moves of their opponents. Stories of past kings and queens were used as both entertainment and examples. Cautionary tales of bad decisions contrasted with praise of successful rulers. This subtle form of instruction served to both inform and inspire them, shaping their understanding of what it meant to be a royal, to rule, and to lead. Their lives were a delicate balancing act, a blend of childhood freedom and the heavy weight of expectation. They were children, yes, prone to mischief, prone to laughter, and prone to the occasional honey cake-fueled kitchen invasion. But beneath the laughter and chaos lay the foundation of their future reign. The laughter and chaos of their childhood served as an unexpectedly effective training ground, shaping their character and preparing them for the complex, if often absurd, world of medieval royalty. Their journey was a reminder that even those destined for a life of pomp and circumstance must endure the inevitable spills, tantrums, and the ever-present threat of a rogue gingerbread man. The royal nursery, that chaotic battleground, wasn't just a place to play. It was a place where future kings and queens were forged, one spilled milk and one honey cake invasion at a time. The echoes of childish laughter still hung in the air, a stark contrast to the hushed tension that descended upon the royal court the moment the king's health took a turn for the worse. Gone were the flower bombs and honeycake sieges, replaced by whispers, hurried consultations, and the glint of ambition in the eyes of those who suddenly found themselves tantalizingly close to the throne. The king's illness wasn't just a medical crisis, it was a powder keg, igniting a simmering conflict that had been brewing for years beneath the veneer of royal harmony. The king, bless his cotton socks, had been rather fond of lavish feasts and even more lavish pronouncements. His proclamations, often delivered after a particularly robust intake of ale, were known for their vagueness and their tendency to contradict each other. This, of course, only exacerbated the already complex web of inheritance laws. The result? A royal family poised on the precipice of all-out war, not over territory or ideological differences, but over the precise wording of a decree issued after a particularly rousing game of drunken chess. Princess Aurelia, no longer the mischievous whirlwind of her childhood, had blossomed into a young woman of startling intelligence and ambition. She possessed her father's penchant for dramatic pronouncements, albeit delivered with far more finesse and a considerably lower alcohol content. Her younger brother, Prince Edgar, remained his ever-charming self, though his juggling skills had sadly deteriorated since his Roman emperor phase. However, his charm proved to be a surprisingly effective weapon in the courtly power struggle. The problem, you see, was the king's rather unconventional will. It seemed he'd spent his later years less focused on the succession and more focused on perfecting his recipe for mead. The document itself was a masterpiece of ambiguity, filled with cryptic clauses and enough metaphorical language to make a Chaucer scholar weep with frustration. Did the heir with the keenest wit refer to Aurelia's sharp intellect, or Edgar's ability to charm the birds from the royal aviary? And what exactly constituted sufficiently pious devotion? The court's theologians were locked in a furious debate, their arguments rivaled only by the squabbling courtiers jostling for position. The situation was further complicated by the arrival of a distant cousin, Lord Bartholomew, a man whose claim to the throne rested on a rather tenuous interpretation of a legal document from the 13th century. Lord Bartholomew wasn't known for his charm or his intellect, but he possessed an army of impeccably trained lawyers, all armed with dusty tomes and an insatiable desire for a royal appointment. Their arguments were convoluted, filled with Latin phrases and legal jargon that would make even the most seasoned lawyer reach for a stiff drink. The court was a whirlwind of activity. Loyalists of Aurelia and Edgar gathered in separate factions, each side whispering promises and trading insults with equal fervor. The air crackled with unspoken threats and the clinking of tankards in the king's favorite tavern. The scene of many a drunken royal decree seemed to echo the impending clash. Lady Beatrice, Aurelia's closest confidant, a woman whose sharp tongue was only surpassed by her loyalty, was actively undermining Lord Bartholomew's claims. Her methods were as subtle as a sledgehammer to a china shop. She orchestrated a series of accidents that ensured that key pieces of Lord Bartholomew's supporting documentation went missing, with alarming regularity ending up in the royal kitchens. The cook, coincidentally a distant relative of Lady Beatrice, simply claimed it was a very good way to thicken the royal stew. Prince Edgar, bless his heart, attempted a different approach. He organized a series of lavish parties, inviting all the key players and a plethora of charming musicians and acrobats, hoping to sway the court through sheer entertainment. His strategy, however, was somewhat undermined by his unfortunate tendency to accidentally set his own hair on fire during one particularly exuberant jig. The rival factions engaged in a series of increasingly ludicrous power plays. There was the Great Tapestry incident, where Aurelia's supporters subtly altered a historical tapestry to depict Lord Bartholomew as a rather unflattering figure. Then there was the Royal Hound caper, where Edgar's dogs were strategically deployed to disrupt Lord Bartholomew's legal meetings, resulting in chaos and more than a few muddy legal documents. The entire court, it seemed, had succumbed to the contagious enthusiasm for petty yet utterly hilarious sabotage. Amidst the chaos, the king's health continued its unpredictable journey, making the entire situation a ticking time bomb waiting for detonation. The court physician, a man whose medical knowledge appeared to be based largely on superstition and a healthy dose of guesswork, offered daily updates that were about as helpful as a chocolate teapot. One day, the king was said to be on the brink of death. The next, he was enjoying a hearty breakfast in bed while dictating a rather confusing amendment to the royal hunting laws. In the midst of the escalating drama, the royal children, now young adults, found themselves caught in the crossfire. The playful battles of their childhood had evolved into a far more serious struggle. Yet, even amidst the intense pressure, the occasional touch of their youthful spirit managed to peek through. One memorable evening, in the midst of a particularly heated debate about the precise meaning of sufficiently pious devotion, Aurelia and Edgar were discovered playing chess, using miniature figures carved from the confiscated evidence of Lord Bartholomew's ill-fated legal campaign. Even the grim realities of succession couldn't entirely extinguish the royal siblings' penchant for mischief. This was a succession battle unlike any other, not a brutal power struggle characterized by violence and betrayal, but a farcical comedy of errors played out on the grand stage of the royal court. It was a testament to the fact that even in the most serious situations, human folly and the absurd have a knack for finding their way in. As the king's health continued its unpredictable dance, the court held its breath, wondering not just who would inherit the throne, but if the kingdom would survive the sheer hilarity of its own self-destruction. The fate of the kingdom, it seemed, rested not on swords and shields, but on the outcome of a rather silly and increasingly chaotic game of royal one-upmanship. The next chapter, naturally, would be filled with even more surprises, more laughter, and more than a few questionable legal interpretations. The kingdom, it seemed, was never dull. The air hung heavy with the scent of incense and lilies, a stark contrast to the lingering aroma of burnt hair and hastily extinguished candles that still clung to the edges of the cathedral. King Theodore, bless his slightly charred soul, was finally, officially, and irrevocably dead. The court, having survived the pre-death antics with only a few minor injuries, mostly to egos and Lord Bartholomew's legal documents, was now bracing itself for the next act of the royal drama, the funeral. The event itself was expected to be a masterpiece of medieval spectacle, a meticulously choreographed display of grief and opulence that would make even a modern-day Hollywood producer green with envy. Thousands of mourners, many of whom had only just discovered their deep and abiding affection for the late king, packed the cathedral. The sheer number of people required a complex system of ropes, pulleys, and well-placed courtiers to prevent any unfortunate collapses into the priceless tapestries. Those tapestries, meticulously restored after the Great Tapestry incident, were now under a particularly watchful eye. The procession itself was a sight to behold. First came the royal heralds, their voices booming out proclamations of the king's virtues, conveniently omitting his fondness for drunken chess and poorly written edicts. Then came the royal family, led by the now Queen Aurelia, who was navigating the complex choreography with the same precision and grace she had used to outwit Lord Bartholomew. Prince Edgar, looking marginally less singed than he had a few weeks prior, trailed behind her, looking rather pensive and occasionally juggling small, appropriately somber-colored pebbles. Lord Bartholomew, surprisingly still in the running for the throne despite the culinary fate of his legal documents, shuffled along looking disgruntled. He seemed convinced that the sheer weight of his numerous black garments was further evidence of his divine right to rule. The sight of him trying to keep up with the procession while simultaneously maintaining his air of superior entitlement provided an unexpected comedic interlude for the more cynical members of the court. Lady Beatrice, ever observant, was seen discreetly adjusting a loose thread on Bartholomew's cloak, a subtle yet effective action that hinted at the ongoing battle for power. The coffin itself was an object of artistic marvel, a masterpiece of gold, jewels, and rare woods, constructed with enough bells and whistles to rival a medieval clock tower. It was so heavy, in fact, that a team of 20 oxen were required to maneuver it through the cathedral doors. The oxen, quite understandably flustered by the occasion, did briefly attempt a small rebellion, resulting in a minor stampede that briefly rearranged the carefully placed ranks of mourners and caused a near-miss collision with the meticulously crafted effigy of the king. Inside the cathedral, the ceremony was a spectacle of both solemnity and absurdity. The archbishop, a man whose piety was only surpassed by his fondness for lengthy sermons, delivered a eulogy that lasted so long that some mourners began to suspect the archbishop had woven in the entire history of the kingdom, plus a few fictional tales of King Arthur for good measure. The chanting monks seemed to be in a competition of who could produce the most resonant drone, creating an almost physical vibration that seemed to be causing some of the heavier tapestries to ripple ominously. Then came the moment of truth, the lowering of the coffin. This seemingly straightforward act was naturally fraught with difficulties. First, one of the ropes snapped, causing a collective gasp from the assembled mourners. After a brief moment of tense silence, a team of resourceful courtiers managed to replace the rope with a length of sturdy chain scavenged from the royal armory. This incident prompted the court to seriously question the selection process of their rope suppliers. Once the coffin was finally lowered, the heavens opened, not with a gentle rain, but with a deluge that turned the cathedral into a chaotic mixture of mourners, umbrellas, and leaking roofs. The reaction was a mixture of stunned silence followed by a wave of uproarious laughter, a truly fitting send-off for a king known for his unpredictable pronouncements and accidental pyrotechnics. Even Lord Bartholomew appeared to momentarily crack a smile, although this could equally be attributed to the rainwater dripping down his neck. Amidst the chaos, Lady Beatrice was spotted handing a small, neatly wrapped package to Prince Edgar, which he subtly placed inside the coffin. Speculation ran rampant. Was it another piece of Lord Bartholomew's legal documentation? A lock of the late king's burnt hair, a memento of his exuberant jig? Only time, and the potential unpacking of the royal remains at a later date, would reveal the truth. The funeral feast, held later that evening in the royal dining hall, was a rather more subdued affair than the king's previous celebrations. However, the air was still thick with tension and the potential for another round of royal mischief. The succession remained uncertain, the lines of power delicately balanced, with only the potential for another chaotic chapter yet to unfold. Even in death, King Theodore had managed to leave his mark, not merely on the kingdom's history, but on the very fabric of its comedic narrative. The court, having weathered the storm of his life and the deluge of his death, could only wait with bated breath for the next act, hoping that it would be equally entertaining, if a little less soggy. The legacy of King Theodore, it was clear, would live on not just in the annals of royal history, but in the collective laughter of the kingdom itself. The reign of Aurelia, it seemed, had begun with a resounding splash, a fitting testament to the legacy she had inherited. And somewhere, in the soggy depths of the royal mausoleum, a few very damp legal documents continued to slowly dissolve, perhaps forever lost to the annals of Miss History. The kingdom, as it had always been, continued its rather unpredictable and often hilarious dance through time. And who knew what comedic calamities awaited them all in the next chapter of their royal saga? The future, like King Theodore's reign, promised to be as exciting as it was unpredictable. The court, perpetually poised on the brink of both disaster and hilarity, was ready to meet it head-on, or perhaps more accurately sideways, amidst a flurry of unexpected events, mishaps, and a healthy dose of laughter. For in the world of medieval royalty, where even death was an occasion for drama, the show, as they say, must go on. Chapter 3: Royal Downfalls and Hilarious History. The aftermath of King Theodore's surprisingly soggy funeral left the kingdom in a state of amused bewilderment. The rain, it seemed, had washed away more than just the mud from the royal courtyard. It had also cleansed the air of the suffocating tension that had preceded the late king's demise. But the laughter was short-lived. The question of succession, a matter previously overshadowed by the king's penchant for accidental explosions and questionable culinary choices, now loomed large. Queen Aurelia, Theodore's widow, was the obvious choice, but Lord Bartholomew, ever the opportunist, was still clinging to his claim, citing a rather dubious interpretation of a very faded scroll he insisted was a crucial piece of ancient royal lineage. He had, in fact, hired a team of scholars, renowned more for their drinking habits than their historical accuracy, to painstakingly decipher its contents. Their conclusion, delivered amidst a haze of ale and conflicting interpretations, was that Bartholomew, being related to a distant cousin of a third cousin once removed of a rather obscure royal, who may or may not have existed, was, therefore, the rightful heir. This logic, while impressively convoluted, failed to impress the majority of the court. Prince Edgar, meanwhile, had rather surprisingly emerged as a dark horse contender, having survived numerous near-death experiences during his father's reign, including, but not limited to, an incident involving a runaway catapult and a particularly aggressive goose. He had cultivated an image of quiet resilience. His sudden burst of popularity baffled even him, although his newfound fan base was largely composed of those who found his melancholic brooding unexpectedly endearing. The situation was further complicated by the discovery of a rather embarrassing royal secret: King Theodore's extensive collection of questionable love poems. These were not your typical courtly love poems, filled with elegant metaphors and flowery language. No, these were poems of astonishing bad taste, filled with awkward similes, nonsensical rhymes, and a truly alarming number of references to turnips. Their discovery caused a considerable ripple effect within the court. Some found them hilariously appalling, others deeply mortifying, and some simply found them an inexplicable mystery. Even the most hardened members of the court were left speechless. The poems, it turned out, were not merely embarrassing, but potentially politically explosive. Some were addressed to various noblewomen, many of whom were married to influential members of the court. Others were written in a rather unconventional style, blending romantic sentiments with elaborate descriptions of royal banquets and military maneuvers. These documents, accidentally discovered while rummaging through the late king's personal belongings, brought a whole new dimension of instability to an already precarious situation. Lord Bartholomew, seizing upon this unexpected opportunity, attempted to use the poems to discredit Queen Aurelia and Prince Edgar. He orchestrated a series of dramatic readings, complete with theatrical gestures and exaggerated expressions, designed to highlight their perceived inadequacies and humiliate them before the court. His performance, however, was less than successful. The poems, already absurd, were rendered even more so by his overly dramatic delivery, resulting in unintended comedic effect. His attempts at political maneuvering were consistently undermined by his own incompetence. He attempted to bribe key members of the court with promises of lavish rewards and positions of power. These bribes, however, were mostly made with goods that were either expired, damaged, or simply bizarre. A collection of slightly used royal socks, a crate of mismatched ceremonial helmets, and a rather disconcerting number of slightly squashed cheeses. These gifts, instead of winning over potential allies, earned him a reputation as eccentric and ultimately untrustworthy. Meanwhile, Queen Aurelia, displaying a level of political savvy that even King Theodore might have envied, cleverly used the situation to her advantage. She appealed to the kingdom's sense of humor, openly admitting to the late king's eccentricities, and using his poetic failings as an opportunity to showcase her own diplomacy and wit. Her tactful handling of the situation contrasted sharply with Bartholomew's clumsy attempts at manipulation. The climax of the succession crisis unfolded during a particularly ill-advised jousting tournament organized by Lord Bartholomew. The tournament, intended to demonstrate his strength and prowess, quickly devolved into a chaotic mess. The knights, fueled by questionable wine and a desire to avoid Bartholomew's wrath, engaged in a series of clumsy spills and near misses. The royal armor was demonstrably less effective than advertised, resulting in several injuries and a considerable loss of dignity. Bartholomew himself, participating in a moment of deluded bravery, was unseated by a rather small and surprisingly agile pig that had somehow wandered onto the field. The final straw came when Bartholomew, in a fit of pique, attempted to settle the matter through a duel of wits with Prince Edgar. using the very same badly written poems to support his argument. However, Edgar, choosing a more passive approach, let Bartholomew exhaust himself with a series of increasingly absurd claims and interpretations, all delivered in increasingly desperate tones. The court, after several hours of watching this comedy of errors, erupted into laughter, leaving Bartholomew humiliated and his claim thoroughly discredited. With Bartholomew's ambitions finally dashed, Queen Aurelia's ascent to the throne was met with unanimous approval, a testament to her shrewdness, wit, and the kingdom's collective appreciation for a good laugh. The reign of King Theodore, though marked by chaos and calamity, had inadvertently paved the way for a more stable and, dare one say, more sensible era. The kingdom, having witnessed the ludicrous spectacle of its former ruler's life and the farcical succession crisis, embraced a new chapter with a newfound appreciation for quiet competence and a continued fondness for the absurd. The legacy of King Theodore would live on, not as a symbol of wisdom or strength, but as a testament to the enduring power of laughter, and perhaps as a very strong deterrent against writing bad poetry. The tale of his fall, as with many other tales of the medieval age, proved that comedy, chaos, and royalty were a formidable combination, creating a narrative as memorable as it was incredibly, hilariously messy. The reign of Queen Aurelia, thankfully, proved less explosive than her predecessors. However, that wasn't to say it was entirely without its share of comical chaos. The kingdom, having just endured the spectacle of Theodore's disastrous reign and the even more farcical succession crisis, seemed to have developed a collective immunity to shock, or perhaps a penchant for the absurd. Either way, the minor rebellions that peppered Aurelia's early years were, to put it mildly, unconventional. Take, for instance, the Great Cheese Rebellion of 1387. This wasn't your typical peasant uprising fueled by starvation and injustice. Oh no. This rebellion was sparked by a rather unfortunate incident involving a shipment of exceptionally pungent Roquefort. The shipment, intended for the royal court's lavish banquet, was mistakenly delivered to the village of Little Puddleton. The villagers, initially repulsed by the smell, soon discovered the cheese's intoxicating qualities after a prolonged exposure to the local ale. Fueled by fermented dairy and righteous indignation, they decided the cheese, a gift clearly intended for them by some higher power, should not be withheld. Their rebellion consisted primarily of a series of increasingly audacious cheese-based protests. They constructed a giant cheese chariot pulled by a team of reluctant oxen, which they rolled through the countryside towards the royal capital, leaving a trail of pungent aroma in their wake. They pelted the royal guards with smaller, albeit equally pungent cheese wheels. Their battle cry? A surprisingly rhythmic chant involving the words Roquefort and justice. The ensuing chaos was described by royal chroniclers as utterly bewildering and surprisingly aromatic. The queen, ever the pragmatist, swiftly diffused the situation. Recognizing the absurdity of the conflict, she arranged a massive cheese-tasting event, inviting the villagers to the royal palace. The Great Cheese Rebellion ended not with a bang, but with a rather satisfyingly cheesy feast, leaving everyone from the queen to the humblest cheese-wielding villager slightly overwhelmed but ultimately content. Then there was the incident of the disgruntled tapestry weavers of Willow Creek. Their rebellion, unlike the Great Cheese Rebellion, lacked any discernible unifying element except a shared dislike for their tyrannical overseer, a man named Reginald the Ruthless, ironic considering his incompetence. Reginald's tyranny consisted mainly of enforcing ridiculously strict rules regarding thread count and fringe length. His methods were so oppressive that the weavers, normally a quiet and unassuming bunch, finally decided enough was enough. Their rebellion began not with weapons or violent protests, but with a meticulously crafted tapestry depicting Reginald as a rather unfortunate-looking pig being chased by a squadron of very angry geese. This tapestry, strategically placed in the town square, became a symbol of their discontent, attracting the attention of neighboring villages and spreading their cause like wildfire. Their rebellion was ultimately resolved with a royal decree that abolished Reginald's tyrannical reign and established a more flexible approach to tapestry-making regulations. Reginald, banished from Willow Creek, was last seen attempting to teach geese to weave tapestries, an endeavor that proved as disastrous as his previous occupation. These, however, pale in comparison to the spectacular failure of Lord Percival's ill-fated coup. Lord Percival, a man whose ambition far outweighed his competence, decided to overthrow Queen Aurelia. His plan, meticulously detailed in a ridiculously long and poorly written manifesto, which he insisted on personally delivering to every household in the kingdom, further cementing his reputation for eccentricity, was to seize control of the royal kitchens. His reasoning, as far as anyone could decipher, was that controlling the flow of food would be the key to controlling the kingdom. Percival's army, if one could call it that, consisted mainly of disgruntled cooks, a few overly enthusiastic bakers, and a surprising number of runaway pastry chefs. Their weaponry was equally unorthodox: rolling pins, whisks, and a truly alarming quantity of oversized bread knives. The battle, fought outside the royal kitchen, was a chaotic display of culinary combat. Flour bombs were thrown, bread dough projectiles were launched, and several unfortunate guards found themselves covered in custard and jam. The chaos, however, was short-lived. The queen, alerted to the impending culinary catastrophe, responded with a counter-offensive of her own, a battalion of royal confectioners armed with an arsenal of sweet treats. The ensuing sugar rush overwhelmed Lord Percival's forces, leading to a rather anticlimactic surrender. Lord Percival, captured amidst a mountain of half-eaten pastries and spilled jam, ended his days not in prison, but running a highly successful bakery outside the royal capital, catering mainly to the royal court's insatiable sweet tooth. These minor rebellions, absurd as they were, offer a glimpse into the unexpected humor that often lurked beneath the surface of medieval society. They were not merely acts of defiance against the crown, but also expressions of the era's unique blend of rebellion, absurdity, and surprisingly delicious food. These incidents, though minor compared to more serious upheavals, highlight the complexities of medieval society, where even a failed coup could end with a successful bakery. The reign of Queen Aurelia, though comparatively peaceful, was far from dull. It proved that even in a time of relative stability, the unexpected and the comical could, and often did, find a way to emerge, adding a uniquely medieval flavor to the narrative of royal rule. And so, the story of medieval royalty continues, a bizarre and beautiful tapestry woven with threads of power, foolishness, and an abundance of surprisingly resilient cheese. The kingdom, it seems, had a remarkable tolerance for the absurd, a quality that would undoubtedly continue to shape its history for many years to come, and perhaps, just perhaps, inspired a few more culinary-themed rebellions in years to follow. The potential for future sugary uprisings remained, after all, quite delicious. The whispers started subtly, like the rustle of silk against stone in the hushed corridors of the royal palace. A misplaced glove here, a hastily scribbled note there, small things easily dismissed as inconsequential. Yet they held the seeds of a scandal that would blossom into a full-blown royal tempest. It began, of course, with the king's prized hunting falcon, a magnificent bird named Bartholomew. Bartholomew, it seemed, had a penchant for the dramatic. He wasn't content with simply catching rabbits. He preferred to snatch jewels from unsuspecting ladies-in-waiting, his sharp talons surprisingly adept at retrieving glittering trinkets. The first incident involved Lady Beatrice, a woman known for her exquisite collection of emeralds. Bartholomew, mid-flight, had swooped down, plucking a particularly large emerald from her elaborate necklace. The event was, initially, treated as a humorous anecdote, a tale told with much laughter and exaggerated gasps at court. However, the laughter faded as Bartholomew's jewel-snatching escapades continued. He developed a taste for the finer things, targeting the most valuable items in the royal collection. His thievery became so notorious that courtiers began wagering on which piece of jewelry he'd pilfer next. The king, initially amused by Bartholomew's audacious behavior, became less so as the inventory of the royal treasury dwindled. The whispers escalated to a roar when it was discovered that Bartholomew wasn't acting alone. Investigations revealed a network of accomplices among the royal staff, a conspiracy of disgruntled servants, and ambitious courtiers who were profiting from the falcon's activities. The king's prized falcon had become the unwitting leader of a sophisticated jewel theft ring, operating right under his very nose. The ensuing investigation was a farce filled with absurd accusations, comical denials, and enough cloak and dagger shenanigans to fill a dozen spy novels. The culprits were eventually uncovered, their plots exposed in a series of hilariously dramatic court hearings. Then there was the matter of the royal chef's secret recipe. Chef Jean-Pierre, a man known for his extravagant creations and even more extravagant ego, had developed a dessert so exquisite it sent shivers down the spines of even the most jaded courtiers. The Royal Raspberry Rhapsody, as it was known, was a culinary masterpiece, a symphony of flavors and textures that left everyone craving more. The recipe, however, was a closely guarded secret, locked away in a vault more secure than the royal treasury itself. Or so it seemed. Rumors spread like wildfire about a mysterious theft, whispers of a clandestine meeting in the royal kitchens, and a shadowy figure seen flitting through the palace gardens in the dead of night. The culprit, as it turned out, wasn't a notorious thief or a foreign spy, but rather a surprisingly inept kitchen apprentice named Pierre. Pierre, driven by an insatiable sweet tooth and a deep-seated desire to impress his culinary idol, had managed to steal the recipe through a series of clumsy maneuvers that involved more mishaps than actual stealth. His attempt to replicate the dessert, however, resulted in a culinary catastrophe of epic proportions. His raspberry rhapsody turned out to be more of a raspberry rebellion, a culinary disaster so spectacular it provided more entertainment than any court intrigue. The king's younger brother, Prince Edward, was no stranger to scandal himself. Edward, known for his charm, his extravagant wardrobe, often described as a walking rainbow, and his rather questionable judgment, found himself embroiled in a particularly embarrassing situation involving a rather large, rather aggressive, and rather smelly goat. The goat, a gift from a neighboring kingdom, was intended as a diplomatic offering, but Edward, in a moment of questionable decision-making, decided it would be a brilliant idea to bring the goat to a royal ball. The ensuing chaos was legendary. The goat, understandably agitated by the glittering gowns and the high-pitched chatter of the court, charged through the ballroom, knocking over tables, scattering courtiers, and leaving a trail of, well, let's just say it wasn't perfume. Edward, instead of apologizing for the unfortunate incident, attempted to blame the goat's behavior on a mischievous fairy, claiming the creature had been bewitched. This, predictably, led to even more laughter and a considerable increase in the whispers swirling around the prince. Edward, ever the optimist, even attempted to capitalize on the event, creating a line of royal goat-branded merchandise, much to the chagrin of the queen. But perhaps the most enduring scandal was the Great Royal Petunia Conspiracy. The queen, a lover of gardening, possessed a collection of prize-winning petunias, each carefully tended and lovingly nurtured. These petunias were not just flowers, they were symbols of the queen's power and prestige. Their sudden disappearance, therefore, sent shockwaves through the court. The ensuing investigation, a blend of high-stakes intrigue and absurd accusations, led to a series of comical interrogations, wild goose chases, and a shocking revelation. The culprit, it turned out, was not a disgruntled gardener or a foreign saboteur, but the royal parrot, Captain Squawk. Captain Squawk, an intelligent but rather mischievous bird, had developed a fondness for the queen's petunias, apparently finding their vibrant colors highly appealing. He had carefully uprooted the flowers one by one, depositing them in a hidden nest in the royal gardens. Captain Squawk's motives remained a mystery, but his actions added another layer to the already rich tapestry of royal scandals. These incidents, though often ridiculous, offered a glimpse into the less glamorous aspects of royal life. They highlighted the human element in the otherwise imposing figures of medieval royalty. The scandals, with their mix of humor, intrigue, and surprisingly tenacious goats, served as a constant reminder that even in the grandest of settings, life could be messy, unpredictable, and often very, very funny. And that even kings and queens with all their power and prestige were not immune to the occasional outburst of absurd and highly entertaining chaos. The whispers may have faded, but the stories continued to be retold, adding a touch of mischievous charm to the chronicles of medieval royalty, proving that the most enduring legacy sometimes comes not from great achievements, but from great and gloriously silly scandals. The royal court, a place often depicted as a tapestry of elegance and refined etiquette, was, in reality, a breeding ground for spectacular fits of royal rage. King Theodore, for instance, possessed a temper as volatile as a freshly brewed cauldron of dragon's breath stew. His outbursts were legendary, ranging from the mildly irritable, a stern glare capable of curdling milk, to the utterly catastrophic, a full-blown tantrum involving the destruction of priceless porcelain and the unfortunate demise of several royal wigs. One particularly memorable incident involved a misplaced goblet. Not just any goblet, mind you, but a goblet crafted from solid gold, inlaid with rubies the size of pigeon eggs. It vanished from the king's table during a state banquet, causing a ripple of panic amongst the courtiers. The king, upon discovering its absence, unleashed a torrent of furious pronouncements that would have made a thunderstorm seem like a gentle summer breeze. He accused the entire court of complicity, his pronouncements peppered with accusations of theft and treachery, delivered in a voice that could shatter glass. The ensuing search was a chaotic spectacle, with courtiers scurrying around like ants on a disturbed anthill. Tables were overturned, priceless tapestries were ripped apart, and more than one unfortunate courtier found themselves unexpectedly airborne, propelled by the king's enraged gesticulations. The missing goblet was finally discovered, not under a suspicious nobleman's cloak, nor hidden in the royal pantry, but nestled amongst a pile of laundry, having been accidentally scooped up by a sleep-deprived laundry maid. The king's subsequent embarrassment was almost as spectacular as his initial fury. He mumbled something about needing a stronger cup of mead, a remark punctuated by a rather loud and undignified burp. Queen Guinevere, while generally possessing a more placid demeanor than her husband, had her own unique methods of dealing with frustration. Unlike Theodore's explosive displays, Guinevere preferred a more subtle, albeit equally unnerving approach to expressing her displeasure. Her weapon of choice? The infamous silent treatment. This wasn't your average passive-aggressive silence. This was a glacial silence capable of freezing the very marrow in the bones. It descended like a shroud, instantly silencing the most boisterous of court jesters and reducing the most intrepid courtiers to nervous wrecks. On one occasion, when her pet peacock, Percival, was discovered having a rather messy altercation with the royal tapestry, resulting in a series of rather unfortunate puncture wounds, the queen simply turned her back, her face a mask of frigid disapproval. The silence that followed was so profound, so heavy with unspoken judgment, that the entire court held its breath for a week, terrified of breaking the spell. Even Percival, normally known for his arrogant strutting, remained subdued, his normally vibrant plumage looking distinctly lackluster. It took a carefully crafted apology from the royal falconer, who offered, as a peace offering, a magnificent diamond-encrusted collar for Percival, to finally break the spell, restoring some semblance of normalcy and color to the court. Then there was the matter of Prince Roderick, heir apparent and a man whose temper was only surpassed by his remarkable ability to stumble into embarrassing situations. His royal rampages were less grand, more slapstick. He possessed a particular knack for tripping over his own feet at the most inopportune moments, often causing a cascade of comical chaos. During a crucial diplomatic meeting with representatives from a neighboring kingdom, Prince Roderick, in a moment of sheer clumsiness, managed to knock over a table laden with delicate porcelain teacups, an expensive Persian rug, and, to add insult to injury, the ambassador's rather prized and highly temperamental pet parrot. The ensuing pandemonium was a whirlwind of shattered crockery, flapping feathers, and a chorus of outraged squawks. Prince Roderick, amidst the chaos, somehow managed to trip over a stray lute, landing in a rather undignified heap. While his fellow courtiers struggled to contain the avian fury, Roderick's crimson face and the sheer awkwardness of his situation became the topic of many a whispered conversation for months to come. Despite his frequent blunders, he was beloved, his clumsiness somehow endearing rather than offensive. Royal frustration wasn't limited to the grand gestures and explosive outbursts. Sometimes the most potent displays of power were the quiet, subtle ones. Take, for example, the case of King Alaric's infamous lost glove. This wasn't just any glove. It was a meticulously crafted glove of finest leather, embroidered with intricate designs, and rumored to be infused with magical properties. Its disappearance caused such pandemonium that it could rival the worst of King Theodore's tantrums. The king, despite his outward calm, began to quietly change the court's routine. The daily schedule was reorganized, minor rules altered, meals changed according to his whims, all because a glove was missing. It was subtle and incredibly effective. The entire court was in turmoil as it scrambled to determine where this glove had vanished to. Rumors spread like wildfire, accusations flew, and searches were conducted with a meticulousness usually reserved for royal treasure hunts. The stress levels soared, causing the court astrologer to predict an upcoming solar eclipse, or at least a major outbreak of boils. The glove was eventually discovered tucked inside a royal parrot's wing, presumably placed there by the bird. Yet, the incident left the courtiers thoroughly unnerved. They learned a valuable lesson. Even the subtlest of royal frustrations should never be underestimated. Royal outbursts weren't just confined to the palace walls. They frequently spilled over into the public sphere, much to the amusement and occasional terror of the common folk. King Edmund, a man of passionate temperament and a fondness for impromptu speeches, once delivered a lengthy oration to a group of bewildered sheep grazers, mistaking them for visiting dignitaries. He berated them at length on matters of state, the finer points of sheep husbandry, and the importance of proper wool carding techniques. The sheep, naturally, remained unmoved by his impassioned delivery, although the sheepherder provided the king with a rather entertaining account of the situation that made its way to the court. These royal rampages, whether boisterous or subtle, were a constant source of amusement and intrigue within the medieval court. They provide a glimpse into the very human and very messy side of royal life. They also provide a stark reminder that even the mightiest of monarchs could be driven to comical desperation by a misplaced glove, a rampaging goat, or a particularly troublesome peacock. They demonstrate that even in the grandest of settings, a good laugh could often be the best antidote to the frustrations of power, and that perhaps the most memorable aspects of medieval royalty weren't necessarily grand declarations of power, but those moments of human fallibility, those gloriously unpredictable and often hilarious displays of royal temper. So there we have it, folks, the final curtain call on our grand, albeit slightly chaotic, production of Wacky Medieval Royalty. We've journeyed through the annals of history, tiptoeing past towering castles and dodging flying goblets, all in the name of uncovering the hilariously human side of medieval monarchs. From King Theodore's volcanic temper tantrums and his subsequent embarrassment over a misplaced golden goblet, to Queen Guinevere's icy silent treatments, capable of turning even a boisterous peacock into a quivering ball of fluff, we've witnessed a veritable parade of royal peccadillos. Remember Prince Roderick, the heir apparent with a penchant for tripping over his own feet at the most inconvenient moments? His slapstick performances, while sometimes causing international incidents, remember the diplomatic meeting and the unfortunate parrot, always managed to elicit more chuckles than outrage. His clumsiness, much like a well-placed pratfall in a Shakespearean comedy, served to remind us that even those destined for greatness were capable of the most spectacular tumbles. And who could forget King Alaric's lost glove incident? A seemingly insignificant missing item that managed to throw the entire royal court into a state of utter pandemonium? The subtle tyranny of the missing glove is a masterclass in how a small frustration can spiral into widespread chaos, all without a single raised voice. It's a poignant reminder that even the most powerful rulers are susceptible to the most mundane and maddening of everyday inconveniences. These aren't just isolated incidents. They are snapshots of a larger truth. Medieval royalty, much like the rest of us, were prone to frustration, anger, and the occasional spectacular blunder. Their struggles, however, were played out on a much grander stage, with far more dramatic consequences. Imagine the stress of managing a kingdom while dealing with the constant threat of invasion, famine, peasant uprisings, and a perpetually grumpy court jester. The wonder isn't that they lost their tempers occasionally. The wonder is that they managed to keep their kingdoms running at all. Let's not forget the courtiers themselves, caught in the crossfire of royal whims and tempers. They were, in essence, the unwitting stars of this royal comedy. Their reactions to the king's and queen's outbursts, the frantic scurrying, the hushed whispers, the panicked attempts to appease the enraged monarchs added another layer of amusement to these historical dramas. They were the silent witnesses, the supporting cast, constantly on edge, always ready to react to the unpredictable storms brewing within the royal court. Their lives were a constant balancing act of diplomacy, tact, and the desperate hope that they wouldn't be the next unfortunate victim of a royal temper tantrum. The absurdity of it all is almost overwhelming. Imagine the scene. A king berating a flock of sheep on matters of state, a queen silently judging a peacock for its tapestry-related misdemeanors, a prince tripping over a lute during a crucial diplomatic summit. It's the kind of comedic chaos that wouldn't be out of place in a Monty Python sketch, yet it's all rooted in historical reality. And what did we learn from all of this? Well, firstly, that history isn't always a solemn affair. It's full of surprises, absurdities, and enough human drama to fill 1,000 sitcoms. Secondly, that even the most powerful people are human. They have their flaws, their quirks, and their moments of utter ridiculousness. Finally, and perhaps most importantly, that laughter is the ultimate antidote to the stresses of power and misplaced goblets. Consider the legacy of laughter left behind by these medieval monarchs. Their stories passed down through generations weren't just tales of conquest and royal decrees. They were also hilarious anecdotes, shared around crackling fireplaces and recounted in hushed whispers in courtly circles. These stories served as a form of social commentary, a way to poke fun at the powerful and to remind everyone, even kings and queens, that no one is immune to the foibles of human nature. Think of the countless tavern tales, the whispered conversations in the royal kitchens, the songs sung by traveling minstrels, all echoing the comical misfortunes of the royal family. This laughter, this shared amusement at the quirks of royalty, helped to level the playing field, creating a sense of unity among the people who had to endure the unpredictable moods of their rulers. These stories remind us that history is far more than dates and battles. It's the sum total of human experiences, including all the glorious messiness, the unintentional comedies, and the laughter shared amongst the participants. It is a reminder that behind the gilded cages, the power struggles and the political machinations were real people, grappling with the same triumphs and tribulations, the same anxieties and petty frustrations as we all are today. The Wacky medieval royalty saga, then, is not just a collection of amusing anecdotes. It's a testament to the enduring power of human resilience, our ability to find humor in the most unexpected places, and our shared experience of navigating the often absurd realities of life, regardless of social standing. It's a final bow to the chaotic, the unpredictable, and the hilariously human side of medieval monarchy. So raise a glass, a sturdy non-gold goblet preferably, to the wacky royals, their bewildered courtiers, and the enduring legacy of laughter they have left behind. And remember, even kings and queens can have a truly terrible day. Maybe they needed a good therapist or at least a stronger cup of mead. Either way, their stories continue to amuse and remind us that we are all, in our own unique ways, a little bit royal, a little bit wacky, and entirely human. Now, if you'll excuse me, I have a rather pressing engagement involving a peacock, a tapestry, and possibly a very sharp pair of scissors. For the bird, of course.